In the spring of 1452, a boy named Leonardo was born under the soft Tuscan sun in a stone house near the village of Vinci, some 30 miles from Florence. His father, Messer Piero Fruosino di Antonio, was a notary of modest wealth, a man of ink and contracts, while his mother, Caterina, was a peasant girl with gentle hands and a fleeting presence. Their union was a whisper in the night, unmarried, a stain on Piero's respectable name, and Leonardo entered the world as an illegitimate child, a bastard in the eyes of a rigid society. In our history, this spark of exclusion ignited a fire of genius that burned through centuries. But what if that flame never caught? What if Leonardo da Vinci, a mind brimming with wonders, shrank into himself, locked his dreams behind timid eyes, and faded into the dust of an ordinary life? Picture him as a boy, not sketching the flight of birds or the swirl of rivers, but staring at them from a distance, his thoughts a tangled knot he couldn't unravel. He lived with Caterina until he was 5, her lullabies his only comfort, until Piero took him to the family estate. There, with his young wife Albiera and a growing brood of legitimate heirs, 9 brothers, 3 sisters, Leonardo was a shadow, a quiet figure trailing behind. The countryside stretched wide around him, alive with hawks soaring and streams murmuring, yet he didn't dare touch a quill. "What if I fail?" he'd mutter, a question that rooted him still. His dreams of men flying, of machines defying Earth, stayed locked in his skull, vivid but voiceless. Piero saw no spark in him, no flicker worth fanning. The boy wasn't bold or brash like his brothers, who wrestled and boasted of war. Leonardo shrank from their games, hiding in the barn to watch ants march or spiders spin, imagining worlds he'd never share. Education passed him by. Latin was for the lawful sons, not a bastard. He learned basic sums and Italian from a gruff uncle, Francesco, who taught him to till soil and mend fences. "Work the land, boy," Francesco barked. "Dreams don't feed you." And Leonardo nodded, swallowing his visions of wings and water wheels, burying them under calloused hands. By 14, in 1466, the family moved to Florence, a city of clamor and color, its streets pulsing with artisans and merchants. Piero's notary trade thrived, but Leonardo, shy and stammering, couldn't follow. Guilds ruled the crafts, the arti maggiori for notaries like Piero, the arti mediani for smiths, the arti minori for bakers. Illegitimacy barred him from all but the lowest, yet even there he faltered. "I'm not fit," he'd whisper, dodging apprenticeships. Piero, exasperated, tried once to nudge him toward art, showing his scribbles, crude, hesitant lines of a bird, to Andrea del Verrocchio, a master sculptor and painter. Verrocchio squinted, shrugged. "He's got something, but no fire." No offer came. Left adrift, Leonardo lingered on Florence's edges. He'd sit by the Arno River, watching water ripple, picturing a wheel to harness it, but never sketching, never speaking. The Medici's grandeur, palaces, statues, awed him, yet he felt too small to approach. At home, his stepmother Albiera and later Francesca, Piero's second wife, barely noticed him among the clamor of lawful heirs. "Stay out of trouble," they'd say, and he did, retreating to an attic corner with a cracked window. There, he'd stare at the sky, dreaming of a contraption to soar, canvas stretched over wood, flapping like a bat. Someday, he'd think, then sigh, but not me. Years slipped by. At 20, in 1472, his peers found trades, bakers, weavers, while Leonardo drifted. He took odd jobs, hauling flour sacks, mending boots, his hands nimble, but his tongue tied. Florence buzzed with Renaissance fervor. Painters like Botticelli dazzled, engineers raised bridges, but Leonardo watched from alleys, a ghost in the crowd. His mind spun with ideas, a lens to see stars, a cart that moved itself. Yet fear gripped him. "What if they laugh?" he'd murmur, clutching a stick he'd whittled into a wing shape, then hiding it under his cot. His father's death in 1504, decades later, left him nothing. Legitimate sons claimed the estate, and Leonardo sank deeper into solitude. By 30, in 1482, he was a ragged figure, his tunic patched, his dreams heavier than ever. Florence's wars with Naples flared and faded. Lorenzo de' Medici brokered peace, and the city thrived. Leonardo, though, saw no place for himself. He'd linger near Verrocchio's workshop, peering at apprentices mixing pigments, imagining a mural of Christ's Supper, figures alive with shadow, but never daring to knock. "I'm too late," he'd think, turning away. His brothers, now merchants and soldiers, mocked him. "Get a spine, Leonardo," they'd jeer. He'd nod, head down, and shuffle off. Poverty crept in, odd jobs dried up. His stammer, his hesitance, made him a liability. By 35, he was scavenging scraps in Florence's markets, a beggar in all but name. He'd sit by the Ponte Vecchio, watching fishers haul nets, picturing a device to lift water from rivers, gears and pulleys a marvel, but his hands stayed idle. "It's foolish," he'd mutter, kicking a pebble into the Arno. Passers-by ignored him, a gaunt man with wild hair and sunken eyes, muttering to himself about impossible things. His dreams grew louder, a cacophony he couldn't quiet. Bridges spanning seas, men swimming beneath waves, yet he shared them with no one. At night, under a leaking roof in a borrowed shack, he'd trace shapes in the dirt, tanks rolling over fields, wings cutting clouds. "If only I'd tried," he'd whisper, tears streaking his face. Guilt gnawed at him, a mind so vast yet so caged. He'd recall Verrocchio's shrug, Piero's indifference, and think, they were right. I'm nothing. Florence glittered around him. Michelangelo, 23 in 1498, carved giants from stone. But Leonardo shrank further. "He's bold where I'm weak," he'd scrawl in the dust, erasing it fast. His potential, a buried seed, withered under self-doubt. By 40, in 1492, he was a fixture on Florence's fringes, a beggar now, clutching a tattered sack. He'd beg near Santa Maria Novella, coins clinking rarely into his palm. "Spare a bit?" he'd rasp, voice trembling. Some tossed bread, pitying the mad dreamer who rambled about flying. His mind still churned. "A tube to breathe underwater," he'd mumble, or "a light to pierce night." But no notebook held them, no quill, no courage. He'd watch carts rumble by, picturing gears to ease their load, then sigh, too late. This Leonardo wasn't the Titan we know, no Mona Lisa, no Last Supper. He was a man who saw wonders, but locked them inside, a genius undone by fear. Part 1 ends here, at 40, a beggar in Florence's shadow, his dreams a silent scream. Part 2 will follow him into obscurity's depths, chance encounters, a flicker of hope, and a final reckoning with the life he might have lived, a poignant mirror to the brilliance he never claimed. By 1492, Leonardo da Vinci was 40, a gaunt silhouette against Florence's golden glow. The city thrummed with Renaissance vigor. Michelangelo's chisel sang, Botticelli's colors danced, but Leonardo was a beggar now, a tattered figure slumped near Santa Maria Novella's steps. His hair, once neat, hung wild. His eyes, once bright with wonder, dulled under hunger's weight. Coins clinked rarely into his trembling hand, tossed by pity or scorn. "Spare a bit," he'd croak, voice cracking like dry earth. Passers-by called him the muttering fool, a man who rambled of flying machines and water tricks, his dreams spilling out in whispers he couldn't cage. Florence had no place for him. His father, Messer Piero, long dead since 1504, had left him nothing. His legitimate brothers claimed the estate, their lives now woven with trade and war. Leonardo's shack, a crumbling lean-to near the Arno, leaked with every rain. At night he'd huddle there, tracing shapes in the mud with a stick, gears to lift stone, wings to pierce clouds. "If I'd spoken," he'd murmur, "if I'd dared." The thought choked him. His mind, a storm of ideas, battered a body too frail to act. He'd imagine a lens to see the moon's face, a bow to hurl bolts across fields, but fear, always fear, kept them locked inside. "They'd mock me," he'd hiss, erasing the dirt with a shaking hand. Days blurred into survival, he'd scavenge market scraps, rotted apples, crusts, his stomach a hollow ache. Yet his eyes still caught the world's pulse, a hawk's glide, a river's bend. A frame to ride the wind, he'd think, picturing a kite of wood and cloth. But no quill captured it, no voice shared it. His brothers passing in fine cloaks sneered. "Still dreamin', eh?" they'd taunt. He'd shrink, nodding, a ghost in their shadow. The Medici's Florence, palaces rising, statues gleaming, mocked his stillness. "I could have built that," he'd mutter, then turn away, ashamed. At 45, in 1497, chance brushed him. A young artist, Gian, apprenticed to Verrocchio's old rival, paused by his begging spot. "You've a sharp eye," Gian said, catching Leonardo's sketch a spiral in the dust. "Ever try to brush?" Leonardo froze, heart pounding. "Once," he lied, voice a rasp. Gian tossed him a coin and a scrap of charcoal. "Draw something. Sell it." That night, under a flickering stub of stolen candle, Leonardo traced a bird's wing, feather soft, air curling around it. His hand shook, but the lines sang. "Maybe," he thought, clutching it. Dawn broke. He hid it under his mat. They'd laugh, he decided, and begged on. The charcoal lingered, a taunt. At 47, in 1499, he tried again, a face half-formed, eyes like Caterina's. A baker's wife, Maria, saw it as he begged near her stall. "That's lovely," she said, trading bread for it. "More?" Leonardo nodded, mute, and drew a flower next, petals curling, stem bent. She paid in scraps. He ate for days. A flicker stirred. Could he live this way? But crowds unnerved him. "They'll see I'm a fraud," he'd whisper, retreating. The drawings piled under his mat, a secret hoard, until a storm soaked them to mush. "Fool!" he cursed himself, weeping over the ruin. Milan's wars spilled south. In 1500, French troops clashed with Sforza's remnants. Florence braced for chaos. Leonardo, 48, watched from alleys as engineers hauled catapults, designs he'd dreamed but never voiced. "I thought of that," he'd mutter, picturing a wheeled fortress, cannons spitting fire. A soldier, tossing him a rind, laughed. "You? A war maker?" Leonardo flinched, silent. Peace returned, but the city's pulse quickened. Michelangelo's David rose in 1504, a giant of marble. Leonardo, begging nearby, stared. "I could have." He trailed off, turning to the Arno, its flow mocking his stagnation. By 50, in 1502, he was a fixture, ragged, bearded, a beggar's cliché. His shack crumbled, He slept in church doorways clutching a sack of rags, yet his mind wouldn't rest. A tube to breathe underwater, he'd mumble, or a light from oil steady as day. Passers-by snickered, children threw pebbles. One, a boy named Luca, lingered. "What's that mean, old man?" he asked, pointing at Leonardo's dirt-scratched spiral. "A way to move water," Leonardo rasped, startled into truth. Luca grinned. "Make it." Leonardo shook his head. "Too late," he said, shooing the boy off. Luca left a crust. Leonardo ate, ashamed. At 55, in 1507, a priest, Father Matteo, took pity. "You've a keen look," he said, offering shelter in a monastery cellar. "Help tend the garden." Leonardo nodded, mute, and hoed rows, his hands deft. Alone, he'd stare at roots, imagining a pump to lift water, gears clicking, pipes humming. "Tell me," Matteo urged one dusk, catching him mutter. Leonardo froze. "Just nonsense," he lied, retreating. Matteo gave him a scrap of vellum, a stub of charcoal. "Write it." That night, Leonardo drew a canal lock, water rising in steps. It could work, he thought, then hid it under straw. No one cares, he decided. The monastery was a reprieve, food, a cot, but not peace. At 57, in 1509, a visiting scholar, Paolo, overheard him mumble about flight. "You know machines?" Paolo asked, eyeing the beggar's rags. Leonardo stammered, "A little." Paolo pressed, "Show me." Cornered, Leonardo scratched a wing in the dirt, canvas taut, joints bending. Paolo gasped, "That's brilliant! Come to Bologna. Work with me." Leonardo's heart raced, his throat closed. "I'm no one," he croaked, fleeing to his cellar. Paolo left, baffled. "Coward," Leonardo sobbed, clawing the straw. The vellum lock stared back. A lifeline refused. By 60, in 1512, he was frail, teeth gone, hands trembling. The monastery fed him, but whispers grew. "He's mad." Matteo died. A stern abbot replaced him. "Earn your keep or go," the abbot snapped. Leonardo, too weak to hoe, begged again. Near the Duomo now, its dome a taunt. "I dreamed domes," he'd rasp, picturing arches he'd never built. A merchant, Sophia, paused one day. "You've clever hands," she said, seeing him twist straw into a helix. "Make toys. Sell them." He crafted a bird of twigs, wings flapping with a pull. She paid. Others bought. For months he lived barely on scraps and trinkets. Yet the spark dimmed. At 62, in 1514, a fever took his strength. He'd sit by the Arno, toys unsold, muttering, "A bridge of rope, light, strong." A girl, Anna, watched. "Build it, abuelo," she urged. He smiled, first in years, then coughed. "Too old," he said, handing her a twig bird. She kept it. He faded. Winter hit. He sheltered in a ruined mill, shivering. "I saw it all," he'd whisper. "Cities of glass, men in the sky." But I stayed silent. Regret was his shroud, dreams his only warmth. Part 2 ends here, at 62, a beggar teetering on collapse, his genius a ghost haunting his bones. Chance teased him, Gian, Maria, Paolo, Sophia, but fear won. Part 3 will carry him to his end, a final encounter stirring his buried fire, and a quiet legacy left in shadows, a meditation on potential lost and found too late. Winter, 1514, gripped Florence in icy claws, and Leonardo da Vinci, now 62, was a wisp of a man, huddled in the ruins of an abandoned mill near the Arno. His body ached, bones brittle, breath shallow from a fever that lingered since autumn. The tattered sack at his side held a few twig toys, unsold remnants of a fleeting trade. His hair, a tangled gray mane, framed a face etched with lines of regret. Once he dreamed of machines to conquer sky and sea. Now He begged for crusts, a beggar known only as the old mutterer to the city's bustling throngs. Yet his mind, though dimmed, still flickered with visions, bridges of rope, lights to banish night, locked behind lips too timid to speak. The mill's cracked walls offered scant shelter. He'd cough, a wet rasp, and clutch his chest, whispering, "I saw it all, wings, wheels, wonders." Regret was his constant shadow. Florence gleamed beyond. Michelangelo's David stood proud. The Duomo's dome pierced the sky. But Leonardo felt a stranger to it. "I could have," he'd murmur, then stop, the words too heavy. His life was a litany of if-onlys. If only he'd dared Verrocchio's door, shared his water pump with the monks, shown Paolo his wing. Instead, he'd shrunk, a genius drowned in silence. One gray dawn, as snow dusted the riverbank, a figure approached, a girl no more than 12, bundled in a patched cloak. It was Anna, the child who'd taken his twig bird months before. She knelt, her dark eyes wide. "Abuelo, you're sick," she said, pressing a stale loaf into his hands. Leonardo managed a faint smile, his first in weeks. "Keep it, little one," he croaked, but she shook her head. "You told me about bridges. Make one." Her voice was firm, a spark against his gloom. He stared, startled. "Too late," he said, coughing. She frowned. "Then tell me." Something stirred, a crack in his shell. He leaned on the mill's wall, breath ragged, and pointed to the Arno. "A bridge," he rasped, "not stone, rope, woven tight, swaying but strong. It had spanned this river, light as a web." Anna's eyes lit up. "How?" she pressed. His hand trembled as he traced the air, cables looping, knots binding. "Like a spider's thread," he said, voice warming, "but for carts, people." For an hour he spoke. Gears to lift water, a kite to ride wind, words tumbling free after decades of silence. Anna listened, rapt, clutching the bread. "You're clever, abuelo," she said at last. "Why didn't you build them?" Leonardo's smile faded. "I was afraid," he admitted, voice breaking. "Afraid they'd fail, afraid I'd be nothing." Tears welled, freezing on his cheeks. Anna touched his hand. "You're not nothing. You made my bird fly." She pulled the twig toy from her cloak, its wings still flapping with a tug. He stared, a lump in his throat. "Keep talking," she urged. "I'll remember." Days blurred. Anna returned, bringing broth, a blanket, stolen perhaps from her mother's hearth. Leonardo, too weak to refuse, let her sit by him. He'd whisper of a lens to see stars, a cart that rolled without horses. She'd nod, soaking it in. "I'll tell Papa," she'd say, her father a carpenter. Leonardo doubted it. Dreams died with him. But her faith warmed his final hours. On a bitter night in January 1515, his breath slowed. Anna was there, holding his hand. "Fly, abuelo," she whispered. He smiled, eyes closing. "Someday," he breathed, and was gone. He died at 62, a beggar in a mill, no tomb to mark him. Florence spun on. Michelangelo carved, the Medici ruled. But Leonardo vanished, a ripple lost in the Arno. Yet Anna kept his words. At 15, she showed her father a sketch, a rope bridge, rough but his. The carpenter built it, a small span over a creek, marveling at its sway. "Who taught you?" he asked. "An old man," she said, "with dreams too big to hold." The bridge stood, a whisper of Leonardo's mind, passed to a child who dared. No Mona Lisa graced walls, no Last Supper awed monks. His 15,000 pages never existed. His genius stayed a murmur, not a roar. Yet in Anna's hands, a twig bird flew, a bridge held. His legacy wasn't fame, but a quiet seed, a girl's memory, a carpenter's craft. What if he'd risen? Cities might have soared, skies opened. Instead, he was a shadow, a cautionary echo. Brilliance unshared is a light snuffed out. But in his end, a flicker lived, not in history's books, but in one child's stubborn hope.